Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Turning the Key, episode 6, with myself, Patrick, and my co-host, Sean.
Good morning.
We are this week going to be getting into the 13th hexagram in the Ching, the key of empathy in the gene keys, the Siddhi of empathy, the gift of discernment, the shadow of discord. So if you had been following along, if you listened to last week's episode 5, where we went into the key of virtue, this hexagram is the pair to virtue. So some of the themes that we're going to be speaking about today with empathy, you may find some dovetailing with what we spoke about and the themes that we spoke about last week. Every week we dive into one of the hexagrams in the I Ching and the gene keys, and Sean and I braid together just our deep passion for this incredible transmission technology stream and see where the conversation takes us. So good morning, Sean. Welcome.
Good morning. Yeah, it's great to be here. I feel last week and this week are very important keys to drop into, considering the state of the world and just humanity in general, and the exchange and marriage and communion and intercourse of yin and yang, male, female, positive, negative. And there's some real beautiful symbolism and archetypal wisdom within these two, especially when they come together. And you see them juxtaposed side by side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for anybody listening, a great way to dive in, we like to just invite you all at the very beginning to explore. We typically begin a little bit with just some of the shadow elements around these hexagrams, what they're inviting us to explore and teach us. And so with this key, the shadow of discord, there are a lot of acoustic themes around this hexagram, and it has a lot to do with the way that we listen. The way that we listen to ourselves, to our own hearts, the way that we listen to others, and how we allow the information that we take in from the world around us to influence us and either bring us into deeper sympathy, empathy, or to bring us into deeper chaos, noise, and feeling closed off or feeling overwhelmed by the immensity of pessimism and pain and suffering that exists around us in everyday life in this world.
Exactly.
So, without further ado, Sean, I'd love if you'd like to just welcome us into the breakdown of the hexagram from the symbol itself.
For sure. So when you look at the hexagram, it's Qian, or heaven, over fire, Li. So that creates a very unique expression. As far as there's only one yin line in the second place, all the rest are yang lines. And when you think of fire under heaven, this is not the fire that has turned into the hearth. This is not a chimneyed fire. It's not a contained fire per se that's inside a place. This is a fire in the open air, right? So this is the campfire. And just like what you were saying of how we bring information in, just think of what the campfire did. It gathered humans around it, and then the storytelling that would happen around the campfire and the sharing of information. Or if you were a traveler and you were on your own and you came upon a fire, you would approach it, cautiously, but you would approach it with this excitement that there would be other humans there. And when you joined another person's fire, like what everyone would be really hungry for is like, what's the news? Where do you come from and what news do you bring? Or what's happening over there in that part of the world? And, that the fire in many ways in our life has been replaced or just has, transformed into first the radio, this spark of electricity, this internal fire that was like bringing the news, and then the TV, and now our phones, And just to think that the shadow of discord of how the information that we receive about what's going on out there, like what does that do to us internally, and what does that do to our communities? You know, of really, we are basing reality on this information that we're receiving around this communal fire, and how much discord that the inappropriate and misguided use of that technology, what that has done for us, you know, and you know, going into some of the like a Christian mythology or Christian tradition, that really the gospel means the good news, you know, and so, but how much good news do we bring into each other's lives, you know? And what would the world be like if actually the news did concentrate on what is good and what is going right and what needs to be celebrated, you know, rather than what is breaking down, what is what needs to be feared, what needs to like have all this cautionary energy around, you know?
Yeah, no, it's an incredible key and archetype to explore during these times, and pairs so well with what we spoke about last week, which, if for those of you who haven't checked out last week, we were speaking a lot about the shadow of division and what gives rise to the creation and of conquesting armies, and how we kind of gallivant through the world and try to raise coalitions to be able to champion certain ideological missions, virtuous, false virtuous missions to the demise of human life and just, you know, the sanctity of the earth. But here with the shadow of discord, Richard in the Gene Keys speaks a lot of the core dilemma of this shadow being pessimism, and how we allow that pessimism, sort of tuning into that radio channel of pessimism, to influence our lives and how we orient ourselves to the world around us. So it doesn't take more than a moment to empirically test this for yourself, to go and look across any social media platform, turn on the TV, and we've normalized this feed of information about who got shot, who's bombing who is killing who in the world, and who's polluting what. All of this internal strife and all of the imagery of the desecration of natural ecosystems, the fighting, the bloodthirsty violence, all of this, where of course, at some level, we've needed to turn off our sensory abilities. You know, it reminds me of when I was living in New York City, and after work, if I was on my way to go to a kickboxing class, and how I became so adept at navigating the flow of noise and nonsense on the street, where here I am kind of dodging, you know, this person that seems scary, and here I am walking past this rat, and here I am walking, you know, past this car accident, and sirens and all of this stuff, and just the concrete jungle, and how I started to notice those qualities of like where I became that concrete, because it's just too much to take in that immense level, the capital in many ways of disconnection, the beacon of disconnection in the world. You have to become that stone, and where people pride themselves on becoming like concrete in order to survive, to be the rose that breaks through the cracks in the concrete. And how little by little, with the progression of technology and the way that we've consumed media in our lives, where it's no longer confined to being in, the living room with the television on or off, you're carrying it everywhere you go. You're opening it up in the checkout aisle at the grocery store.
Yeah.
You're looking at the red light in the car and you're seeing who bombed too. And it's just so normalized that this deeply impacts our psyche and our way of relating with one another, where when it's actually time for us to listen to one another and someone else's pain, it's almost like I don't really have the access place in myself to even receive what you're sharing, because I'm so over the brim in how much I've just been stewed in the mess of the pessimism of the world and the pain and suffering. I can't receive any more of what you have to share with me about your life, because who's listening to me and my pain? And that happens at a subtle level. And I truly believe that gives rise to how most people find their entertainment: inebriation, going to the bars, going and watching UFC fights, stuff that is like loud, going to sports games loud, and it's hyper stimulation, and it's just an opportunity. In many cases, a lot of the most popular things are an opportunity for you to just kind of be in your own bubble of noise and call that connection with one another. And there's nothing wrong with finding, moments of joy and connection in those spaces. But if we are normalizing in a society, the act of how we connect with one another is through creating additional noise rather than deeply being able to feel into someone else's experience. How can I relate with you more deeply with where you're at and you with where I'm at? And if we're blocking off our ability to do that, then we're continuing to divide, that shadow of division, the paradise key, where the less we're able to listen to each other and really empathize with one another with where we're at, the more we are separated and divided off from one another and isolated. And of course that paints a very pessimistic future for the world.
Without a doubt. Yeah, a lot of what you said really rang true, like in particular describing kind of like how all the noise and the input from your story of like walking through the city and how we become calloused, to pain, and how pain becomes normalized, and almost like we get so like life is pain, life is hard, and I don't have time for your pain because nobody's listening to mine, and it struck me with this idea of how like the fire that was once just open under the sky and inviting to people who needed warmth and community. Now that fire that we now hold in our hands is actually driving us away from community and driving us into these sequestered, sheltered spaces that we quote unquote feel safe, and more than that, we feel safe enough actually to disregard our pain and our natural like sympathy and empathy for others. And we move into these tirades where we're just vomiting out all this pain and all this hatred and all this pessimism, and we're projecting it and directing it onto other people. And we're walking around with this huge emotional callus over our hearts, and I wonder, and I'm not advocating just like this like, how to say it, like unchecked charity, but this idea of when you see a homeless person on the street or you see another human being in pain, I really believe that it's a very natural place within us to move towards that person to help, and because it's such a normal thing, especially in a place like New York City, like what narratives come into our field that explains away that natural space within us that moves towards somebody else in need? All these criticisms and all these judgments. You should get a job. What did you do to like get yourself on the street? And a place where actually there's a terrified place within us that is like, what would happen? How like is it possible that could be me?
Exactly.
And so you rally against it, It's like classic homophobia and a good boys locker room in high school. All the boys are scared that could I be gay? And in order to like say like, I'm not, you have this, this affront and this army, you know what I mean, that you raise, and the discord and the pessimism within you is turned around and you're projecting it out on others because it's so it's so hard to feel now because we have this callus around our heart, and that tender place within our heart that is not feeling now, when it does actually feels, it feels so deeply and so painfully that it's like terrifying to actually be in that space. But we need to feel something, so now we're attracted to this stimulation, like you said, the UFC, where we are just needing to see people beat on each other, you know what I mean, and the rush that happens, or this inebriation where we need to melt away that callus on our heart through this imbibing of controlled substances, you know what I mean, or
in order to dance and find love and date and
actually express yourself, in this uninhibited way.
Yeah. It's such a, I mean, I'm already feeling it in this, it's so deep. And, in, my journey over these years of exploring the depths of my own pain and working through my own healing and, reshaping my own relating with the world and who I've been and who I'm becoming. It's a lot to let it in.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to open up the door and to let it in. And it feels so casual to just, with the flick of a thumb, one of the most simple gestures
that defines our humanity,
effortless.
Right? Our opposable thumbs,
It's very good point. With the flick of our thumbs, here's a little tiny box on a screen that tells you about a child that got brutally murdered. And then you look at that, and then you develop either that, like, how dare that person, or you completely numb out too much, scroll past it until you see the next thing. And then the next thing is a video of gardening tips or something like that. And there you are. And it's like, over time, I love how you're talking about the callousing, because we don't realize over time how callous builds up. As somebody who used to find part of my own way of managing my own pain and heartbreak through intense workouts with being an ex-CrossFitter, there was a whole thing there that was like, well, if you're going to do your muscle ups, which are a form of pull up where you get up above the bar and then do a dip, that, at some level it's very gymnastic. It looks cool in a way. It can kind of be a symbol for somebody going through that journey of a sense of progression and strength and accomplishment.
And if you ever find yourself in an action movie, you need to be able to muscle up over a fence, or you need to be able to jump up on a ledge because, they're coming. Yeah.
And the callousing, becomes of your hands, becomes kind of the gateway to you being able to really do a lot of those. And I've experienced in my practicing where, like the callus rips and how painful that is. That's part of the progression in that whole sphere, is like develop the callus. And it doesn't take you long to realize, if you move outside of a space like that and you're tending and stewarding to land and you're building with your hands, that naturally develops anyways. And it becomes a part of how we reach out and work with the material of earth around us and tend to life and steward. And I'm not like harping on callous here, but I am just putting an acknowledgement towards like how callousing has been just kind of normalized as the way by which we need to navigate through life with other humans in a shared society on this planet, that we have to callous ourselves off from one another in order to feel a sense of safety, because the noise and the pain and suffering is too much to take in. It's too much to look at. So let me just kind of create this callous bubble for myself to feel safe.
Exactly.
And it's funny that one of the biggest apps, one of the biggest media or just like social community apps that exists out there is called Discord.
Right. I was thinking
where
about that.
channels are created, and, you know, many different projects, teams build up companies by using Discord. I've used Discord. You know, but it's a funny nod sometimes with these shadows to look at what our relationship with a word has been. And when you start to look at it through the lens of a shadow, and, you know, where's Discord just sort of unidimensional, you know, hopping into a conversation and just speaking the words, but not actually dropping into the deeper layer of depth of the real conversation that wants to take place between two humans' hearts. And that's the journey of what we're talking about today. And what blocks us and keeps us in this space where the expression spectrum of the shadow of Discord through the lens of the gene keys is, on the one end of the spectrum, permissive, where it's kind of just like fully open. You know, you kind of just, you numb yourself out from how much you take in. So you're not really there. You've sort of checked out, and you just allow the noise to just flow through you, and you've dissociated and you're not there. To the other end of the spectrum, which is narrow-minded, where you get really closed off about not really taking anything in from life. And that's the expression where it's like I'll reject you before you reject me. My door is shut. This is like the opening, like somebody knocks on your door and you have the latched, the chain latch, and you open it up and you look and see who's there. You know, so you have either the open door, no care for who's running through your house, or you have the chain latch. And we oscillate between those two ends of the spectrum, and can feel tormented by that experience of like, actually the deeper thing, if I actually can get in touch with the deeper pain that exists inside of me, I just want to connect with other people. I want to feel listened to in what's been hard and painful for me in my life. And how can I find my access point to receiving that by being able to receive a little bit more of somebody else's story, somebody else's pain, somebody else's experience. And can I stretch into that and not be overwhelmed by it, but initiate that as my prayer, as my intention, that my pain also gets listened to, that my pain also gets held by someone else with me.
I mean, that's quintessential, like, human need, you know what I mean? And what you were saying about the permissive and then the narrow-mindedness, what a perfect spectrum that social media is, you know what I mean? You get on social media and there's just so much, you know, that is available to you from every walk of life, every expression of humanity, and just that permission just to be exposed to all of it, you know what I mean? And as a parent, that I can say is one of the most terrifying realities that I live through every day is, what could my kids be exposed to today if they get into the internet or social media or something else? Like, the permission of what we allow to be in our fields, you know what I mean? When we're using these ill-adapted expressions of the campfire. And then the other spectrum of that is the narrow-minded ranting, whether it's from woke culture or virtue signaling or just straight up hatred of people just venting and just like vomiting this venom poison out into
Religious
yeah,
fanaticism
all fanaticism to that narrow-minded, that
to
I
every
am right, you are wrong, and let me prove it to you. You know what I mean? And that spectrum, like you said, and I really think what you said about connecting heart to heart is so important, and how we deeply yearn for that, how we deeply yearn to share a common fire, to share a space where we can all gather around and listen and then be listened to. And how important that gathering in circles. And as we both know, like gathering in circles as men, gathering in circles as women, or gathering in circles, and however the need is expressing itself, like the support group, the AA, like all these different places where human beings actually gather around a common center and share their hearts. And whether there's a fire burning in the middle of that circle or not, there is still a fire there, and that is our heart's fire. And this is where the imagery through the hexagram is so beautiful. And as we move, from the shadow of discord into the city of empathy, of where really unity consciousness is really coaxing that, out of each other, and where physically we gather around a common fire to share our hearts. Where can we look at another person who may look, seem, talk, act completely different, but see their common fire, see the common fire of humanity? And this is because really the truth of the matter is that we're all the same thing. Whether it's the first law of thermodynamics, energy and matter is never created or destroyed, it only changes form, or the creation of our solar system through a singular solar event where the sun was born and sprayed dust all into the solar system, and then different bands of different weights all collected, that material all accreted, and then that created the planet, that then the gravitation in the center of the planet ignited and created a fire, a central fire, that then allowed the volcanism and the atmosphere to coalesce around the planet to now hold the sunlight. And now that sunlight weaves its way into the form, and the energy then marries and life is born. And essentially, can we all see each other as expressions of the sun, of the very same sun, that very same energy, which is the basis of our food chain, which is the basis of the energy and the metabolism that's bursting out of our cells? And like a really beautiful thing is that if you were to go up to the sun and hover right next to the sun, you would feel no heat. And even though there's solar flares that look like tongues coming out, and swirling, like you would hear no sound, because in the vacuum of space, that heat isn't transmitted. Only when the energy of the sun hits our atmosphere and gets transduced into this living energy, then the sun has expression. Then it makes noise. Then it shares its heat. And in Chinese medicine, the sun itself is considered imperial fire, whereas ministerial fire is actually the burning of that energy, the burning of creating that solar energy that's condensed down into matter and releasing it again as heat and fire and flame. And like, what is the minister? Again, going back to the gospel, like sharing the good news, sharing the heat, sharing the connection, and like how much fire was the original technology that really changed humanity and allowed us to have such a greater reach and expansion and expression of creativity and presence on this planet.
Yeah, the symbolism of the campfire is so profound, man, what you're talking about with the sun, because it's like until fire was created, the sun just existed in the heavens. And then here was this experience of kind of creating a micro sun there on the surface of the earth, the smoldering embers, and feeling that heat. And so that gift from the heavens of the fire right there, and just like every life form on the planet is around, is facing towards the grand campfire of the sun, and receiving and sharing information that allows for all of life to grow and build and expand. Here is like this microcosm with the campfire. And when we think of this shadow of discord in the relationship with what we were talking about last week with division and themes and concepts around armies and the raising of armies, and as you're speaking, I'm getting taken back to just the ideas of, or the thoughts of where the campfire for a military camp became a symbol of that space of this central hearth for the troops to kind of tend to the wounds, to receive the warmth, the nurturance, the food, and to eat. But also it creates a very vulnerable circumstance. If you've ever sat around a campfire in the dark, your eyes dilate to that campfire where you can't see threats off in the darkness. And how many military battalions were completely decimated and taken out, and battles and wars overturned by sneak attacks upon, the campfire. And so that sense, within ourselves as we're sitting around the fire of like, hey, I want to really listen. I really want to feel your pain, soldier, and your wounds. And I want to feed you this soup, but part of me can't really fully be there with you because somebody might jump me and attack me from behind. And so I can't actually fully be there at the campfire because something might get me. And there's that pessimism. Something might take me out. And so when you translate that into people sitting around a dinner table, you translate that to people sitting around the conference table in a corporate building, you have the same thing. There is an invisible fire there that is every time humans gather around in a circle like that, where something's being exchanged. But we've brought the exchange so far away from the heart up into the mind, so that we don't have to drop into the deeper space, because it requires much more presence and like our pupils to be dilated, our heart pupils to be so dilated, and the heart of the person right there before us to really sympathize, empathize with them. And if I'm living in my trauma body and I'm living in my mind disconnected from my heart, and part of my perception is linked back to times earlier on in my upbringing when I got hurt by not paying attention, or I got jumped by not paying attention to, my broader surroundings. Well, I can't be fully present there with you. And so I am sitting there kind of like a body in the chair. And I'm not actually able to really drop in and fully be there at the fire with you and to feel fully what wants to be felt, and to have that exchange with each other. And so this, as you introduced, just the gift of discernment in the language of the gene keys, so that it's like, okay, we have all of this noise. What do we do with this? If I don't want to live that life of feeling like an isolated automaton, divided off from everybody else, how do I start to rejoin the campfire in communion with everybody else? And the gift of discernment almost healthily welcomes you into a healthier step into your individuality, because it's a space to say, well, in order to join me at the fire, you have to be there as you. You can't be split off, divided off into all of these other spaces. So the first step is this discernment is starting to discern between what's mine and what's not mine. if I'm feeling aggravated and triggered in this moment, what is actually mine, and what is, something that is not mine? That's my mother's voice, or that's my father's temper, or that is, some program offered by the, corporate media about how I should feel about this person and the color of their skin.
Right.
What's mine and what's not mine? And starting to discern and filter out all of the junk. It starts with this filtering of, hey, I can't actually, my transponder is all crossed. I can't fully be there with this person because I have all of these other radio signals from other people, my old caretakers and the people that brought me up in this life, from school, religious programming, all of this other stuff that's just stewed and soaked into the sponge of my being. Let me start to wring out that noise so that I can actually get clear and say, I can feel you because I can feel me.
Yeah.
And if I can feel me clearly, and I'm not also getting confused by what I'm feeling by feeling my father or feeling my mother's story, then I can actually be with you with where you're at. Or I can even be with you with where you're at in ways that you don't yet have access to within yourself. And I can hold space for that compassionately, because I am, through my deeper listening, because I'm more fully here, I'm actually inviting you into that clarity more deeply in yourself, to drop down into your heart and what's really real in that moment. Almost like if you've ever been around a dinner table and somebody's sharing something really casually about something really painful that happened to them in their day, but maybe they're sharing it like as a joke, or they're sharing it as like something that's like an annoying thing. But again, they have that energy that's like, let me just scroll past it, But if you take that moment and you feel more deeply, because you've been able to access in yourself, like, wow, that actually sounds rough. Like, that must have sucked, and whether you actually open that comment or you just feel that within yourself,
and that's it,
because you've listened through their own noise, something gets transmitted to them about feeling seen and feeling heard in their pain. And that sends a signal to that younger part of them that's trying to be heard, that, hey, you don't have to joke it away. You don't have to explain it off. You don't have to avoid it. Somebody's actually out there who can be there with you and listen to you and sit at the fire with you about what you have to share.
Oh yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that, Patrick. I love this idea of like filtering, of discernment. And, because in a way, discernment has this quality of cutting out, of saying no to things and being like, I'm being discerning, so I'm actually saying no to you, or like there's almost there can be an oppositional energy in discernment. But the way that you put it was so beautiful, of like discerning when you're coming from your heart and when you're coming from your mind or your ego, which is essentially a filter through your trauma. And when are we truly sharing a common fire in our hearts, in our heart space? Because that's the largest electromagnetic field around us, is the way that our heart is beating. And when our heart feels relaxed and we feel safe, of that field actually widens. And like what you said about feeling seen, feeling heard, like that is your heart feeling that connection. And like what that does to somebody when you authentically listen to them and you authentically attune your heart to theirs. And the other point that you brought up that really struck me was this space of being able to discern who I am and where I am, as opposed to you, which is this beautiful dance between unity and separation. The more that I can hold my own authentic truth and my own authentic heart space, and I can really discern what is coming through my heart space, rather what is coming through my judgments, my projections, and my trauma responses. The more that I can discern who I am as an authentic person, then I can actually hold you in your own authenticity and in your own heart space, which is essentially our unity, right? Is that when I can see your heart's fire burning in your own unique, beautiful, creative way, and that I can add to that in my own unique, creative way, then actually we're celebrating our unity. We're celebrating our shared humanity, and we're celebrating the spark of life that exists within us. You know what I mean? And is like almost the point of living, is how we recognize that in the thing, in the all the difference around us. We're all unique expressions of life. But when we can actually see it all in this concert of unity, then that's where true love, moves in. That's where the frequency of love is this ability to be in our hearts. And there's one thing that has really influenced the way that I look at esoteric occult stuff is there's so much emphasis on going up. We're going from our root up to our crown. We're going from earthly animal existence up into this divine angelic expression. But really what I feel is happening is that it's this. It's an up and a down. It's our instinctual, physical, existence pulling up. And it's our mental, principled, virtuous, projecting judgment, discernment coming down, our understanding. And it's getting filtered through this heavenly space, and it's getting filtered through this earthly space, and it's meeting in our hearts. And gathering around a fire is such a beautiful expression of that, because we gather around a fire because we have physical needs. Our body needs to be warm. We need to cook our food around a shared resource. You know what I mean? We need to come around and have actually a shared space, because then that's where we can actually thrive. And once we get into that space and our hearts start to open, then we can start getting these downloads and start sharing our own perspectives of our own lived humanity that then helps another person either open up or understand or heal. And like what you were saying of when, what it must have been like to be attacked when you're in that open space, what kind of betrayal was that when finally you were open and you were eating and you were in community, and then you got attacked. And like, isn't that trauma in and of itself, like a twofold thing of where you've been traumatized and you never got back to the fire to share it and to be seen and to be heard and to be like witnessed in your pain? You know what I mean? That never happened for you. So now you're carrying around this story that is like cracking, that you're hurting for. And then how many times have you actually been at that fire and you have been hurt? You've been at that fire and you've been hurt where you should have been held, because you've been hurt by your parent or your sibling or your spiritual guide or someone around that fire who was supposed to be listening and holding and seeing your heart space. But you were, that vulnerable space got taken advantage of,
Man, I felt like some of the tear ducts start to well up as you were sharing that, because it feels so ancient. Right. It feels so deep. And it's, something that has kept people off and divided so deeply, this sense of like, nobody hears me or sees me in my pain. Yeah. And so, and the lives of, shutting the door to your bedroom at night and just climbing under the covers and just feeling like, here I am, just in on my own, and who's there, who's actually with me and hearing me. And then there's this whole connection between fire and heaven, and how throughout cultures, how fire became the vector for prayers to be transmitted into spirit, either speaking prayers into the fire or
Right.
burning symbolically herbs, or writing a
Yep.
letter
And
and
burning it.
burning it in the fire, and then
Yeah.
watching the embers get
Yeah.
sent up to the heaven. And it's this gesture of, God, universe, life,
Yeah.
Jesus,
Right.
Muhammad, whoever, like,
Yeah.
hear me in my prayer, hear
Right.
me in my pain, hear me
Yeah.
in my
Smoking
suffering. And
tobacco
then
and offering that.
smoking
Yeah.
tobacco and offering the smokes to the
Yeah.
heavens. And then watching, has the grand campfire of life heard me
Hmm.
in my
Right.
prayer. And I love this archetype so much. I think I've felt resistant sometimes of leaning into it because of just how much there is to feel in it. And the number 13, Richard speaks of
Mm-hmm.
this, is such an occult number and has been feared, the Friday the
Yep.
13th. And 13 is an unlucky number, when
Mm-hmm.
actually 13 is an
Yeah.
extraordinarily powerful
Yep.
number. When you look at the 12 zodiacs and you look at the 12 apostles, the number 12 repeating through all of these esoteric um, just symbolism of the number 12, and it repeats in so many different lenses, and how the 12 has to come around the one. The 12 zodiac together form the
Right.
completion of the zodiac, the cycle. And so that 13 is the
Mm-hmm.
joining factor. It is the yin, it is the receptive, it is the branch, it's the hub to the spokes of the
Mm-hmm.
wheel.
The
It is the
center.
unifying center that has all of its tendrils out into all of the other 12 and unites them into that shared campfire experience that balances it all, and that allows for the wheel to
Mm.
turn, that allows for the wheel of time, for
Uh-huh.
the literal
Uh-huh.
wheel to turn. Um, and how that has, oftentimes you look in the common just perception of society around certain things, like 13 is an unlucky number, and how these are actually hijacks of really deeply sacred principles, so that people will stay in their pain, their smallness, their separate selves, their ego body, and fear that deeper
Yeah.
principle in the prevention of actually realizing and attaining your own self-knowing,
Mm-hmm.
of your complete eternal interconnectedness with all of life and everyone around you. And that you feeling across the table to the person there with you is you also feeling you
Right.
at the deepest level. And not just the woo woo, we are all one, but this is the
This is the
bridge
bridge.
to all of life. This is the bridge, and the bridge is through that
Yeah.
heart bridge of, can I feel with you
That
and can
rainbow
I be
bridge. Yeah.
with you?
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's so awesome that you brought up 13. There's the 12 disciples, the 12 zodiac, all gathering around a central place. That is the 12 ribs, all
Mm-hmm.
holding and encasing the
Wow.
heart. You know what I mean? And so the heart is the
Wow.
13th segment, and
And it's the
and it's
fire.
the fire. And in common anatomy and physiology, it's like the ribs are there to protect the heart. You always say that ribs are there to protect the heart. The ribs protect the heart. And yes, that is true, but a deeper looking at the anatomy and physiology of it is that the ribs are there to create a containment for the heart. So the heart can actually, that creates the posterior thoracic wall where the great vessels are attached to. And then the bottom of the rib cage creates where the diaphragm comes up and attaches to the lower part. And then the pericardium attaches into the diaphragm. So actually it creates this space where the heart is going from back to front, to here. And that allows the heart to have purchase so it can beat effortlessly. And when the heart beats, it doesn't do this as what we think, it does this. It wrings itself out. So it
Spirals.
spirals and it creates a vortice and it creates a spiraling of your blood so that all the heavy parts go to the outside and inside there's a small little center, vortex in the middle of it. And it creates this yin yang positive negative dynamic between the electrolytes in the blood and then the positive hemoglobin, the positive, the heme groups, the iron on the outside. And so there's this electric dynamic. It's a hydroelectric fluid with this center space in the middle of the blood. And in Chinese medicine, that's where it says that the blood holds the Shen, the blood holds the spirit and delivers it to the whole body. But it's that central space that is the conduit for it. You know what I mean? And the heart isn't necessarily the actual organ. The heart is the empty space that the chambers create. And it's within that empty space then actually spirit can gather. You know what I mean? And so it's like when we create that empty space and put a fire in the middle of it, and then because a campfire isn't a defining space. When that space is defined by the humans that gather around it, now you have a space because now you have a perimeter of human bodies and human hearts that are all now, together. And yeah.
Even with the logs on the fire, where is the fire? It is in the space. It's in the spaces in between the logs. If you've ever tried to create a fire and you try to light a fire by just jamming all the logs and everything together, there's no space. You suffocate it. So it is the space that allows for that flow, the movement, the oxygen,
the air,
to come through. Yeah, this is such a great one. I want to give a nod toward with us talking about discernment. And if we bridge back to what we were speaking about last week with virtue and the gift of guidance, that this process of what we're talking about of dropping into our hearts and actually little by little opening ourselves up to being able to feel into the world around us, feel more deeply into the hearts of others, actually gives us this invitation as we can be more of a guide with life because we're actually listening to the needs of others. And so how many times has anybody listening shared something perhaps deep about what you've been going through, a turning point in your life, a breakup, something happening with your job or your life, anything, that's felt like important to you, sharing with somebody, and they're kind of half there and they start to give you advice and it just doesn't feel, resonant, or you feel like it's just kind of coming through this opinion perspective.
Exactly.
And how when we live in the mind, when we live in that discord, when we can actually sit deeply, fully with another beside them in their heart and feel them in that, we have no chance of actually guiding them in support. Because what we're sharing, if we're not feeling them and we're not connecting that, what we're sharing is just coming from that space of that noise within ourselves. And at some level, whether or not the person can actually consciously acknowledge that, they will be perpetuated and just reaffirmed in their own experience of not feeling ever listened to and really deeply heard in the thing that they're trying to feel heard in. And so many of us, until we really do this work internally and we start to create the pathways for us to clear out some of that noise and drop into our hearts, this is where you can have people just sharing deep things with one another, and it really just stays in that mental space of opinions, perspectives. How do you navigate out of this thing? How do you get rid of that pet problem? You know, how do you get rid of that
Mm,
person? How do you like game the system
mm,
to, you know, to win that
right.
opportunity? All of these sorts of things that aren't actually getting to the deeper thing that's there. Hey, I don't feel worthy of a partner who really deeply
Right.
loves me. Hey, I don't feel worthy of a life that reflects abundance to me, in a way that doesn't have me feeling like I have to run around with my head cut off, trying to scrape by to
Mm,
survive. You know, I feel alone and I feel really isolated in life, and I don't, feel like I have anybody to turn to. These deeper things that people can feel all different types of ways around why they would protect themselves or hide off from sharing that very deeply is perpetuated because there's no receiver present on the
right.
other end. So why would I try to start to open up my heart?
Exactly.
Why would I start to open up the rib
Yeah.
cage to reveal my fire inside if I feel like I'm either going to just get attacked or it's going to fall on deaf
Right.
ears? I might as well just stay closed off in my own
Yeah.
space and do what I can to numb myself, distract myself from actually feeling it, because clearly nobody else is around and available to help feel it
Yeah.
with me.
Yep.
And so if we want to change that, it isn't through going around and demanding somebody fucking feel me. It is by opening up that channel within ourselves to feel what's there ourselves, clearing out the stuff that's not ours, so that you welcome that worthy participant in life who's ready to hear you, because it's actually sacred for someone to have the honor to listen to your pain and
Mm,
to support you in that
mm,
act. This isn't just a gesture of doing you a
right.
favor. This is deep alchemy. This is being
Alchemy.
met by life.
Ooh.
This is Michelangelo's painting, of
Mm,
Adam reaching out to touch
yeah.
God, and to be met in that space, that little space that's between the fingers. If you've ever looked at that painting really closely, I have this incredible book that's this massive book of Michelangelo's works of art. If you look at Adam lying there with his arm outstretched and reaching towards God, if you look at God's finger is direct. It's extended fully. Adam's finger is slightly tilted.
Mm,
If you took the angle at the knuckle and you bent it up, it would make
mm,
contact with God.
mhm.
And there's that subtle
Right.
gesture that you have to make the effort to reach and touch
Yeah.
God. That God, life, source, whatever you want to call it, is always there. The bridge is there, but you have to lift yourself. You have to sit into the seat at the campfire and open yourself to that
Mm,
possibility that you'll be met, that you'll be heard, that your prayer will be heard and held.
yeah. Mm. It's deeply beautiful, and that that space of where we actually open our heart fields and make that conscious connection when we have the courage to actually point, and have that ET moment, where
Mm-hmm.
the fingers light up, and how important that is. And I love what you said about the honor that exists on both sides of sitting in a person's presence and and having that gift of being heard, of being seen, of being felt, but also what that does for you as the listener when you literally pull in the other person's heart story and heart energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an alchemy because you get to actually learn so much about yourself and your own humanity by witnessing another. You know what I mean? And kind of going back to what you said earlier about this beautiful dance between holding your uniqueness and your separateness and allowing that to be a container for actually the unity that is happening. I feel like we could continue to talk for a whole other hour, on
I
this
know,
space
I
and the
know.
whole yin yang
Hmm.
sharing of heart. But I think that's actually a very beautiful space to be in, and for the listeners to really practice somatically feeling your heart space when you're listening to another person,
Hmm.
feeling your heart space while you're moving through an environment. And it doesn't have to be heart open but eyes and ears closed. Like, you can have a level of discernment that holds a certain amount of safety for you and everyone else around you. But what would it mean to you to move into spaces when your heart is actually open? What does it mean
Hmm.
to you when you're engaging in some type of social media and, like, is your heart numbed? Is your heart calloused? Or is what you're seeing and reading actually in resonant frequency with your heart's truth, you know? And where
Hmm.
do you disconnecting from your heart and remaining either in your intellectual cerebral process or your instinctual survival process, when does that create discord and division in your life?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I I love how you're just welcoming people into feeling somatically, because this is the process. There's a lot of deep somatic invitation and wisdom around this journey of alchemy with this particular archetype, because um, the true listener has sat in the seat of their heart, and therefore so much of what is actually listened to is beyond the
Mm-hmm.
words. It is the subtle gestures in the face. If you've ever worked with an incredible somatic therapist, they've really mastered the ability to tell, oh, the blood has left his
Mm-hmm.
face in this
Mm-hmm.
moment. His energy is up here in his
Mm-hmm.
throat, and his eyes are darting a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. Okay, he's in that space. He's starting to tap into a little bit of that trauma fear
Yeah.
response space. So how can I listen more intently and be a guide with taking in the fullness of what that person is experiencing, so that I can help find, hey, here's an opportunity for us to like slow down, or maybe we need to change the settings. Maybe we need to pause and look around the room and take in the space and remind ourselves that, hey, my body is in contact with the surfaces beneath me. There's, in my own experience, in my own healing, and in receiving the incredible attunement of a somatic therapist who both of us know,
Mm-hmm.
who's a dear friend of ours, Will Reason, um, as well as some
Yeah.
others. There's such a mastery of the faculty of listening that expands far beyond the words that are being spoken. It is in the full field of the person. And I also experience this with my own partner, who has this key of empathy in a very pronounced position in her chart in the sphere called radiance, which has to do with kind of your auric presence. And in some ways, in many ways, my experience with her, with Karen, is that it's almost like I can't hide anything from her, because she can just feel it.
Mm-hmm.
She can just feel it through that empathy. She can feel the unsettledness or within me, just in the presence
Mm-hmm.
with me. And so then I have an opportunity in that moment to either be really honest with myself, to drop into my heart about what's happening there, or not, and keep on playing the charade with myself, and avoiding what wants to be felt, or rejecting what is. So thank you, Kay. I've learned a lot there.
So beautiful.
um, I want to say, maybe one more thing, just a theme to start to finish up with this, is Richard speaks really beautifully of the etymology of the words sympathy and empathy, and that the prefix sim means with, but em means it's either within or inside, you know. And so that is the difference between discernment and empathy. Discernment is the band of sympathy. You know, I can be with you because I've gotten more clear about how to be with myself and what's mine and what's not mine. That I'm not with someone else's story. I'm not with someone else's program. I'm in touch with my heart, and I'm with my heart so I can be with you. Empathy starts to take to that next level where I can actually enter inside of you through my capacity to feel, because I've created that bridge of deep, deep knowing and acknowledgement that I am you and you are me. So I can enter fully inside of you and release and feel what is happening in there, and that the medicine of being listened to at that level of depth that smooths over and washes away all of the pain of separation, because it's no longer here I am as the separate self with someone else, which is great, but I am entered into that divine space that this person is living within me because they are me. And so therefore I am connected to this entire tapestry of life that is holding me. And it's that bridge that we're talking about. And I've opened up that gate within myself to be able to receive that listening, to receive that hand outstretched that invites me into that space for everything to live inside of me. And therefore I no longer need to shut the door to the pain of the outside world, because that would be shutting the door to myself. And you know, there's a theme that we haven't spoken about here that we thought that we were going to speak about this whole time. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, well, we might as well. I mean, if we're going to jump into it, let's jump into it. What you were saying though, and like while I was feeling what you were saying, what the imagery that came to mind was, of all the constituents of matter, you know, like which is the four, you know, solids, gases, liquids, and then an electromagnetic, you know, space, the fire, you know, our plasma, so to speak. Of all those elements, when you take two flames and you bring them together, they immediately become one. You know what I mean? When you join fires, the fire immediately becomes one. You know, there's no really other like expression of energy and matter that can really do that as like seamlessly as fire. You know what I mean? And so when you pull somebody's energy into you, and you can really deeply feel and listen to them, that is a unifying, that is a communion, and that is an intercourse. And to what you were saying earlier, if you look at the two side-by-side hexagrams of the two programming partners, of 7 of virtue and 13 of empathy. So 13 has one yin line at the second, so that is our pelvic center. And so the whole hexagram is this like expanding energy of yang lines, but at one place it's receptive. And so that is the picture of the cosmic vagina, of pulling in and moving inward. Whereas the earth and water being the lower hexagram, and then earth, and so this is the 7th key. So that is all this receptive energy, and in one spot in the middle of the pelvic center, there is this energy that's pushing out, and it's energy that's expanding, and an energy that is moving out into the world. That is the yang. And so that is the phallus. That's the cosmic phallus, and not just a phallus, but an erect phallus. And so that penetrative energy, and then that receptive energy. And it's a beautiful expression of yin and yang, of how it's never just yin is here and yang is here. Female is here and masculine is here. It's always a mix of the two. And so the cosmic vagina is actually the fire, which is more of a yang expression, just in and of itself. And the cosmic phallus is the water, which is more of a yin expression. And how when we look at division and we look at the army and how much of that's a masculine, we need to go out, we need to unify, we need to prepare for the future. We need to fortify, we need to train, we need to do this, and like the guidance that is required in order to make that happen, and the absolute virtue that needs to be there in order to guide that in a truly generative way. You know what I mean? And Richard talks about this too, is like that is like responding to a projection into the future. Whereas the feminine, the receptive is pulling in and deeply feeling, but it's in more of a response to the past. And you think of like the feminine gossiping, of people talking about each other, of what people did and what this and this. And that's the news of what has happened, you know what I mean? And how people can spin stories in order to sow that level of discord. But when you use your discernment about what you're taking into your heart space, and you can truly feel what's real for you and what's authentic for the other person, and then you allow those fires to come together, then you have that true empathy. Then you have that receptive of the yin, you know what I mean? And how the army and that receptive yin, like in temple culture, it used to be that when the soldiers came home from war, and in certain aspects, especially around the Mediterranean, Greek, Persian, other spaces, that the soldiers had to spend a certain amount of time in the temples in order to receive this therapeutic intimacy, so that literally the priestesses would pull in and pull the war out of the soldiers and bring them into their own heart spaces through pleasure and through alchemy and through the celebration of what it really means to be human, which is this sharing of love, and to pull that PTSD out of them, and there's and what a common fire than the fire you share with your lover. You know what I mean? And what if we were to enter into that intimate space with our hearts open and not in our heads and not in fully just in our pelvises? What if we were to move into those spaces where we actually were sharing our heart's fire in this space? How different would relationships be? How different would our relationship to pornography be? You know what I mean? Like, would there be pornography? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
So,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean. I felt like that was such a great point to end on here. And as we stewed in everything else leading up to it, really, I just love so much exploring playfully with you these archetypes, and to just see how right there in the hexagram alone, it just speaks the entire story. That's the great beauty for anybody listening who's interested in the I Ching, who's interested in the gene keys. Highly welcome you to just speak a little prayer to life, to explore it, and that the right support, and of course myself and Sean are available for people who are interested and do work with people who are exploring these themes, these technologies. But how quintessentially simple these hexagrams really can be when you just look at the binary code of yin and yang and the permutations of how they're arranged. But then when you play it out through the archetypal expressions across time, and most prevalently for everybody who's alive and listening to this, for our present day reality and how we're navigating the field of pessimism in the world. And as Richard very comically notes, how every generation has this quality to be able to kind of sort of romance, how good things were in their day and how everything is going to shit, in the next generation, and how throughout time and space it's just kind of been that pessimism can leak forward, and just creating this bridge like we're talking about here of like, how do we start to bring people around the campfire again, to just in true open vulnerability. And anybody who's been doing any morsel of inner work on themselves has inevitably started to find the expressions of some of these campfires that are those spaces for your pain to be heard and held, for you to hold and feel and listen to others and their own experience, and how much medicine there is in that listening, how much we learn about ourselves in listening into the stories of others. And so my, I guess, closing invitation for anybody listening here today would be exploring, where are you really listening to others in your life? Where are you listening to noise? And what is blocking you from being able to be a little bit more present in the way that you show up and listen to others in casual, everyday moments of your life, around the dinner table, going out for a walk, people that you work with? How deeply are you really able to listen, and exploring that within yourself, and listening inwardly inside yourself of what's preventing me from being able to be more present and to listen with others, simply by initiating that contemplative exercise and that intention within yourself, within your heart. Hey, I'd love to be more deeply seated in my heart so that I can be more present and listen to others, so that I can also feel listened to in my pain and my experience. That prayer alone, you can burn a prayer on a note to the heavens if you'd want, or you can just speak that into the cauldron of your heart. That prayer alone will start to set the steps in motion in your life for you to experience and to be met in that, to witness somebody, perhaps the person that you've been praying for consciously or unconsciously your whole entire life, to come and sit there beside you at your campfire, maybe the first person who's ever done so, who actually helps you to feel held in something that you've been carrying alone for a very long time. And so with that, I want to just also give a deep bow and a nod, Sean, to how you've done that for me, and likewise, how it just inspires and amplifies my own passion and love in doing this with you. And so just sending so much love to everybody listening, and that I've found in my own life, the more that I've felt held in that way, the less pessimism has been able to sink its teeth in and rule my life and the way that I orient towards the future ahead of us.
Thank you, Patrick.
Here's to a bright future of kumbaya at the campfire with one another. It all comes back to kumbaya.
And the hokey pokey, because sometimes we need to stand up and dance.
Sure, maybe the chicken dance too. So,
thank you, Patrick,
all right,
so much.
Everybody.
So good.
We'll see you next week.
Lots of love.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.